Hey guys, tonight we begin with the immensely chaotic true story of Julius Caesar's assassination. A saga perhaps better known as what happens when your coworkers hate you just enough to attempt regime change. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's historical journey together. Long before Julius Caesar decided it was time to radically upgrade Roman politics, the Roman Republic loved telling absolutely everyone how robust and perfectly functional it was. Senators constantly boasted that their ancient system of checks and balances kept everything stable and orderly. In reality, by the 1st century BCE, the Republic was about as stable as a three-legged table balanced on a slanted floor during an earthquake. But sure, stable. Rome had expanded into a massive global empire, yet its political framework remained the same fragile antique, originally built to manage a single city-state. Imagine running a multinational corporation using a foundational rule book designed solely for a lemonade stand. That was Rome's reality. The Senate kept insisting that nothing was fundamentally wrong, even as entire provinces caught fire in the background. Corruption was rampant everywhere. Bribery was less a crime and more a successful lifestyle choice. Political alliances dissolved quicker than a Roman marriage with no dowry involved. Senators switched loyalties so frequently that even they couldn't keep track of who they were betraying on any given Tuesday. The Republic wasn't dying. It was simply performing a very dramatic, very unconvincing impression of being alive. Enter Julius Caesar. Gambling was ubiquitous. Dice clattered across worn wooden tables. Cards were slapped down with exaggerated confidence. Men lost a week's wages in mere minutes, won them back in hours, only to lose them again before dawn. Arguments could quickly escalate into violence. An overturned tankard or a drawn dagger was not at all uncommon. Tavern keepers consistently kept thick staffs behind the bar, not just for show, but out of daily necessity. Music was another constant feature. A wandering lute player might trade a ballad for a hot supper. Groups of inebriated patrons sang traditional songs so loudly the glass windows shivered. Even more refined establishments located near the Strand employed musicians who attempted, usually in vain, to be heard above the deafening rabble. But alehouses were far more than entertainment venues. They functioned as informal job exchanges, courtrooms without law, efficient rumor mills, marriage markets, political forums, and crucial emotional refuges. A man could mourn, celebrate, rage, confess, or completely forget his troubles, all within the span of a single evening. Women, too, participated more frequently than historical records often admit. Widows owned many of the most successful taverns, and female brewers were counted among the most respected tradespeople in all of London. In these crowded rooms, London revealed itself most honestly. Noisy, unfiltered, ambitiously competitive, and endlessly thirsty. While hawkers supplied the street noise and taverns delivered the stories, the vast network of Tudor London's craftsmen provided the city with its purpose and its essential structure. Every narrow alley, every enclosed courtyard, and every market lane vibrated with the distinct clatter of specialized tools and the steady, ancient rhythm of skilled hands shaping daily life. Traveling foreigners often remarked that Spartan girls engaged in wrestling with a sheer boldness that bordered on the shocking. They did not modestly drop their gaze. They offered no apologies after delivering a forceful throw. Their sole focus was victory, and when they successfully pinned an opponent, the assembled spectators, comprised of women, men, and elders alike, responded with collective pride, never with moral condemnation. The city publicly lauded their physical prowess. Furthermore, wrestling cemented communal bonds. Girls trained in synchronized groups, constantly encouraging and challenging one another, forging the identical robust camaraderie that their male peers developed within the agoge. They were not rivals in the sense of being enemies. They were essential partners dedicated to realizing the collective Spartan ideal. A flawlessly executed throw garnered sincere applause. An error was corrected firmly but without cruelty. The overarching goal was always mutual, shared excellence. This intense preparation resulted in women who carried themselves with undeniable, self-possessed confidence. They walked with straight backs, their steps were measured and steady, and their expressions remained calm. They had total mastery over their physical capabilities. They were utterly unintimidated by rigorous physical challenges and entirely unmoved by foreign condemnation. To the other Greek cities, this regime appeared like sheer madness. To Sparta, it was simply essential preparation. Wrestling forged not only physically superior women, but more capable mothers, more reliable citizens, and consequently, a more powerful state. If wrestling instructed Spartan girls on controlling an opponent during close-quarters combat, javelin training equipped them to command space from afar. The javelin, lightweight yet lethal when wielded by competent hands, thus became one of the most striking, iconic emblems of their highly athletic childhood. Charismatic, ambitious, terrifyingly competent, and possessing more sheer political energy than an entire Senate full of men who hadn't seen a battlefield since their last clumsy hunting accident. Caesar didn't politely join the system. He crash-landed into it, bringing along massive reforms, overwhelming popularity, and an ego large enough to be clearly visible from Gaul. To ordinary Romans, he was the hero they didn't realize they desperately needed. He lowered debts, redistributed land, dramatically expanded citizenship, and threw lavish public games. Because nothing wins hearts like free, spectacular entertainment. The people adored him so much that the Senate began experiencing symptoms of a previously unknown medical condition known as widespread political panic. To the Senate, Caesar was a colossal walking red flag. Not primarily because he was dangerous, though he certainly was, but because he was dangerously effective. Roman politicians were generally accustomed to colleagues who achieved very little over long, comfortable periods of time. Caesar achieved everything before breakfast. He didn't just challenge the old political order. He exposed precisely how flimsy it truly was. The Republic's institutions weren't collapsing because Caesar attacked them. They were collapsing because Caesar merely leaned on them slightly, and suddenly, everyone heard deafening cracking sounds. The senators realized something truly terrifying. Caesar wasn't trying to destroy the Republic. He was simply showing everyone how destroyed it already was. And nothing threatens an old, crumbling system more than a man who clearly proves it is crumbling. Before Julius Caesar became Rome's most acute political problem, he was Rome's biggest overachiever. He was the kind of guy who doesn't just complete the assignment. He redesigns the rubric, rewrites the syllabus, and wins Teacher of the Year. Carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths, weavers, glovers, and dozens of other specialized trades formed the very backbone of London's economy. Each profession tightly protected and controlled by powerful, organized guilds. A craftsman's day began early, often long before the church bells officially tolled. Apprentices swept floors thick with sawdust, cold coal dust, or scraps of leather. Masters inspected the tools sharpened the night before. Journeymen, hoping one day to attain the coveted title of master, meticulously prepared materials under watchful, critical eyes. Guild regulations governed everything: the mandated length of an apprenticeship, the approved designs, the prices that could be charged, and the designated selling zones. Violation meant severe repercussions. Fines, immediate confiscation of goods, or, in the most extreme instances, complete banishment from the profession. Walk past a blacksmith's forge, and you would hear the hammer's powerful ringing echo long before you saw the glowing iron. Sparks burst outward like fireflies each time the hammer connected, dramatically lighting up the smith's soot-darkened face. Carpenters worked in open sheds, shaping massive beams for houses that leaned precariously over the street. Weavers sat hunched over their looms, the rhythmic movement of their shuttles sounding like the mechanical heartbeat of London's immense textile trade. A cooper might be assembling a sturdy barrel, his workshop thick with the smell of fragrant oak and burning pitch. Craft-specific streets formed virtual neighborhoods unto themselves. Shoe lane for cobblers, pudding lane for bakers, ironmonger lane for metalware vendors. Milk Street, Bread Street, and Fish Street Hill were named with striking, practical directness. London rarely wasted imagination on utility. These localized areas buzzed with constant activity, a disciplined choreography of labor performed by thousands who rarely strayed beyond the boundaries of their specific trade. For the entirety of the Greek world, the concept of young women practicing to hurl weapons, even under the guise of sport, was morally inconceivable. But for Sparta, this constituted yet another crucial phase in molding women who were both physically intimidating and rigorously disciplined. Training sessions generally occurred in the broad, open fields situated outside the city's defensive walls, where the terrain allowed for the necessary distance required for long, forceful throws. Girls systematically learned to grip the shaft correctly, angle it with perfect precision, and release it at exactly the right moment. Javelin throwing was an exercise in controlled power. Spartan instructors meticulously focused on technique, scrutinizing the stance, the necessary twist of the torso, and the alignment of the shoulders. A successful throw was never reliant on brute strength alone. It demanded perfect coordination, timing, and balance. Javelin practice served two crucial, intertwined purposes. First, it vigorously strengthened the upper body, particularly the shoulders and core muscles deemed essential for the coming demands of childbirth. Spartan philosophy drew a direct line from individual physical strength to the welfare of the city. They believed a woman who could hurl a javelin with accuracy could better endure labor and, consequently, raise sturdier, more resilient children. To Spartans, this connection was self-evident. To outsiders, it served as yet another confirmation that Sparta operated by rules incomprehensible to the rest of the Greek world. Second, javelin training actively cultivated profound focus. A girl was taught to ignore external distractions, narrow her mind into a kind of tunnel vision aimed at a single target, and commit fully to the execution of her movement. In a society that expected its women to speak boldly and act decisively, this kind of mental clarity was an invaluable asset. If Rome had a most likely to accidentally become supreme ruler award, Caesar would have hung it prominently on his wall right next to his stack of military trophies. Caesar wasn't born powerful. He built everything himself. Reputation, wealth, alliances, and enemies. Lots of enemies. He climbed the Roman political ladder so aggressively that the ladder itself probably filed a formal workplace complaint. By the time he reached his mid-career, Caesar embodied everything the senators feared in one person. Ambition, startling intelligence, raw charisma, military genius, and the innate ability to make the public love him without even seeming to try. A modern politician would kill for that skill. Senators in Caesar's time literally did. But what truly made Caesar dangerous wasn't just his talent. It was the shocking fact that he relentlessly delivered results. While most Roman politicians specialized in delivering speeches that said nothing and accomplished even less, Caesar went out, successfully conquered Gaul, wrote a geopolitical bestseller about it, and sent the Senate updates that basically summarized as, "Still winning. Wish you were here." His military campaigns were so wildly successful that Rome eventually ran out of creative ways to brag about him. Meanwhile, his soldiers absolutely adored him because he shared their hardships, won their battles, and didn't make them sit through mandatory PowerPoint presentations. They marched with him not merely out of duty, but because he was the kind of commander you would genuinely follow into a hostile war zone, or at least into a mildly concerning forest. The problem? No man in Roman history had ever become that popular that quickly. And nothing alarms entrenched politicians faster than the presence of someone the public likes significantly more than them. But the guild system offered more than just bureaucratic oversight. It fostered a powerful sense of community. Members supported one another through periods of illness, funerals, apprenticeships, and celebrations. Feast days prompted grand displays of banners, parades, and enough food to thoroughly embarrass a minor noble household. Masters took immense pride in their craft, stamping their identifying marks onto finished goods with the same precision and pride as an artist signing a painting. For all its noise and strict regulation, the world of the Tudor craftsman revealed a crucial truth. London survived not merely on trade and gossip, but on countless hands working tirelessly in workshops that almost never fell silent. Here, skill was both currency and identity. If the craftsman provided London's foundational structure, the street performers imbued it with soul. Stroll through Cheapside or cross London Bridge on a busy morning, and you were immediately immersed in a kind of raw, open-air theater, one that required no admission fee, followed no script, and depended entirely on the fickle mood of the passing crowd. Jugglers, minstrels, acrobats, ballad singers, fortune-tellers, and fire-eaters transformed ordinary lanes into spontaneous stages that lived and died by the volume of applause. A lute player might stand on a corner singing a mournful ballad about a doomed lover or an executed criminal, stories Londoners consumed with the urgency of fresh gossip. Children gathered first, their eyes spellbound. Adults followed, pretending not to listen as they paused briefly to rest their weary feet. A highly skilled singer could earn enough coins to eat well for a day. A poor singer earned swift ridicule, which, in London, often came louder than any applause. Jugglers tossed sharp knives in narrow alleys, sometimes missing by mere inches, because their performance space doubled as a walkway for impatient butchers and rushing apprentices. Spartan women were famed for their sharp tongues and sharper intellects, and exercises like javelin throwing nurtured this specific discipline long before they reached adulthood. Competitions were a regular and spirited affair. Girls eagerly lined up to test their accuracy and distance, cheering on their companions or engaging in good-natured teasing of rivals. Victories were celebrated openly. While losing was never shameful, failing to show consistent improvement was. Spartan culture prioritized progress over perfection and resilience over personal pride. Foreign observers were astonished by the spectacle. Young women standing in the hot sunlight, muscles tensed, faces fixed with determination, launching javelins farther than many men could manage. To these visitors, it appeared to be a society utterly inverted. To Sparta, it looked exactly as it should. By mastering the javelin, a Spartan girl internalized more than just a skill. She absorbed Sparta's core belief that strength, precision, and courage were attributes belonging equally to women and men. To an outsider, Sparta seemed solely preoccupied with physical hardness, running, wrestling, javelins, and endurance. But those who looked closer discovered another essential layer of a Spartan girl's education: the cultivation of rhythm, coordination, and controlled movement through dance and music. These were emphatically not gentle entertainments or merely decorative accomplishments. They were integral tools of discipline, unity, and physical mastery, woven deep into the fabric of Spartan life. From a very young age, girls practiced choruses, large, synchronized group dances performed during religious ceremonies, public festivals, and civic competitions. These dances demanded razor-sharp precision. Every movement had to be timed perfectly, voices needed to blend harmoniously, and every participant required the stamina to perform under the blazing sun before the entire city. Caesar's victories granted him massive wealth, unmatched influence, and legions of loyal, battle-hardened soldiers, which, from the Senate's anxious perspective, was essentially a full checklist for a potential future dictator. The Senate wanted generals who remained humble, controllable, and preferably far away. Caesar was none of these things. He was successful, charismatic, and dangerously close to being unstoppable. By the time Caesar finished conquering Gaul, he didn't just return to Rome with treasure and glory. He returned with momentum, dangerous momentum, the kind of political momentum that made senators wake up at night in cold sweats, whispering prayers like, "Please, Jupiter, just let him retire quietly, or at least move permanently to Spain." But Caesar wasn't retiring. He wasn't slowing down. He was only getting started. And Rome was not ready for him. By 50 BCE, Julius Caesar had achieved something truly fatal in Roman politics. He became too successful to ignore and far too powerful to control. The Senate tried to contain him the way you might try to contain a tornado using a bedsheet. Caesar had armies, victories, popularity, and ambition, which, in Roman political terms, is the equivalent of writing "Please exile or assassinate me" across your own forehead. The Senate's solution was deceptively simple. They ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome alone, without the legions that adored him. They essentially said, "Come back unarmed. We promise we won't hurt you." Caesar, being highly intelligent, instantly recognized this as the political equivalent of, "Come into the alley. We just want to talk." Meanwhile, Caesar's enemies, led by Pompey and the hardline optimates, gathered in Rome, sharpening their legal daggers and salivating at the prospect of prosecuting him the very moment he stepped foot in the city. Acrobats rolled and flipped in open squares, kicking up plumes of dust and drawing cheers. Some performers wore gaudy costumes copied directly from the playhouses. Others simply worked in whatever rags they possessed. But all of them understood the same vital truth. In London, entertainment was survival. Yet, the performers were never alone. Rogues, master tricksters, and pickpockets viewed these dense crowds as prime hunting grounds. A cunning cut purse could deftly relieve 3 men of their money bags during the climax of one particularly mesmerizing juggling act. They worked in coordinated teams. One created the sudden distraction, another slipped the purse, and a third vanished instantaneously into the crowd. London authorities attempted to clamp down on them, but the streets provided too much cover, anonymity, and too many escape routes too twisted to map. Fortune tellers, some genuinely gifted, others complete frauds, set up small, cloth-covered booths. They read palms, cast bones, murmured vague prophecies, and offered cheap charms meant to ward off sickness, heartbreak, or bad luck at sea. Housewives sought their guidance. Young men openly laughed at them, then quietly returned for private advice before attempting a risky gamble. Even serious merchants paid for auspicious omens before major transactions. The boundary between deep superstition and practical belief blurred easily in a city where plague and fire perpetually lurked. And then there were the storytellers. Standing atop barrels or crates, they recited heroic sagas, foreign adventures, or scandalous local rumors. In a city where literacy was a luxury afforded to few, these storytellers served as composite newspapers, historians, comedians, and preachers, all rolled into one captivating figure. Together, performers and rogues turned the London streets into an unpredictable stage, where every corner held the possibility of an extraordinary show or a calculated scam. Spartan dances were overtly athletic, filled with leaps, powerful turns, and dramatic gestures that required strength rather than fragility. The purpose was twofold. First, the intense physicality of dance strengthened the legs, core, and posture. A Spartan girl learned to carry herself with an unwavering confidence that would have terrified an Athenian matron. Here, grace and strength were not seen as opposites. They were inseparable qualities. Every kick, every sweeping motion of the arm, and every coordinated step etched discipline into muscle and bone. Second, dance instilled unity. Spartan society placed collective excellence above the individual ego. In the chorus, no girl was permitted to stand out at the expense of the group. Everyone had to listen, adjust, synchronize their efforts, and contribute equally. This training directly prepared them for adult life, where absolute loyalty to the city and flawless coordination within the community mattered far more than personal comfort. Music was equally essential. Girls learned to keep complex rhythms using pipes and lyres, their voices rising together in martial anthems that honored the gods, celebrated heroes, and reinforced Sparta's legendary military legacy. These were not soft lullabies. They were powerful, often stirring songs designed to inspire courage and foster fierce civic pride. At major public festivals like the Gymnopedia, girls performed before huge crowds that included elders, renowned warriors, and visiting foreigners. Their voices carried across the gathering, steady, clear, and utterly fearless. To other Greeks, the sight was bewildering. Young women singing boldly, dancing energetically, and moving with athletic grace. While Athenian girls were supposed to be quiet, hidden, and modest, Spartan girls were expected to be visible, living symbols of the city's intrinsic strength. Through dance and music, they mastered control, unity, rhythm, and presence. Not because he was uniquely guilty of anything, well, he was, but so was every senator, but because eliminating Caesar would instantly restore their own power. They feared him not for his alleged crimes, but because no one looked competent or impressive standing next to Caesar. So Caesar stood at the edge of the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, staring across the water like a man intensely contemplating whether to press send on a dangerously honest text message. Roman law was unequivocally clear. A general crossing into Italy with an army constituted treason, guaranteed civil war, instant chaos, and zero takes-backsies. Caesar paused, took in the momentous gravity of the situation, and then crossed anyway. Legend says he uttered alia iacta est, the die is cast. A more accurate translation might simply be, well, here we bloody go. With that single step, Caesar declared open defiance. The Senate panicked. Pompey panicked. Basically, everyone except Caesar panicked. And Caesar didn't panic because he had something Rome feared most: utter confidence backed by terrifying competence. As he marched south, cities surrendered instantly. Many welcomed him. Others simply hid behind curtains, pretending not to be home. Caesar wasn't just crossing a river. He was crossing into political immortality. This moment shattered the illusion that the Republic was in control. Caesar made it clear: if the Senate wanted a fight, he'd give them one and he would win. The Rubicon wasn't just a river. It was Rome's last warning. And Caesar stepped over it like a man late for his destiny. Once Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the Roman political class collectively entered what historians accurately call severe meltdown mode. Their plan to intimidate Caesar into surrendering failed instantly, mostly because Caesar flat out refused to act like a man who knew he was supposed to lose. If any singular location defined the ultimate collision of Tudor London, where the rich, the poor, the honest, and the crooked mingled without distinction, if London's pervasive stench defined its atmosphere and the sight of plague doctors fueled its terror, then the street hawkers undeniably provided its lifeblood. From the moment the sun crested the horizon until the final rays of light vanished, they saturated the streets with an incessant, often deafening chorus. These vibrant sellers served as the city's complex blend of messengers, entertainers, marketers, and sometimes, acute irritants. Their wares covered the entire spectrum of necessity and curiosity. Food, small trinkets, questionable remedies, essential services, and, crucially, fresh gossip, all advertised at maximum volume. Every hawker cultivated a signature call. The pie seller might bellow, "Hot pies! Hot beef pies!" until his voice gave out. A vendor of pins and needles might deliver their pitch in a rhythmic, semi-sung chant. Contrastingly, a woman selling lavender sprigs offered a slow, momentary sanctuary to anyone overwhelmed by the city's overwhelming filth. Meanwhile, children selling matches or apples shrieked competitively, operating on the apparent belief that sheer volume could materialize coins from reluctant passers-by. The result was a continuous, frantic soundscape, a perfect amalgamation of aggressive commerce and vibrant chaos. These hawkers navigated London's labyrinthine, crowded alleys with the relentless, fluid motion of schooling fish. This agility wasn't optional. The street itself functioned as a constant, cutthroat battlefield. Heavy carriages clattered past, refusing to yield an inch. Butchers casually discarded bloodied water into the open gutters. Housewives aggressively pushed for better standing room. Apprentices dashed by, racing to complete their urgent deliveries. These performances were never distractions from training. They were the training itself, refining the poise, stamina, and unshakable self-confidence that defined a Spartan woman. Physical training shaped a Spartan girl's body, but rigorous education sharpened her mind. Unlike the rest of Greece, where girls were seldom taught to read and were strongly discouraged from speaking publicly, if they spoke at all, Sparta expected its daughters to be articulate, intelligent, and bold. A Spartan woman's words became as legendary as her strength, and many men from other cities privately admitted they feared a Spartan tongue even more than a Spartan spear. Girls were taught reading, writing, poetry, and even elements of philosophy. Their education was entirely practical, not merely ornamental. They needed to fully comprehend laws, property rights, inheritance rules, and the heavy responsibilities of managing large estates while the men were constantly away at war. Athenian women were confined to the domestic sphere. Spartan women frequently ran entire households and sometimes managed vast fortunes. Ignorance was thus deemed unacceptable. Spartan instructors encouraged open debate. A girl was taught to defend her ideas, question assumptions critically, and speak directly without hesitation. If she mumbled or softened her voice, she was immediately instructed to repeat herself louder. Confidence was not optional. It was a deeply ingrained skill. Elders believed that a sharp, well-trained mind produced sharp decisions, which ultimately led to better children and a stronger city. This intense focus on intellect created a cultural phenomenon that the rest of Greece found genuinely shocking. Outspoken women. Spartan women were famous for their biting wit and fearless, often laconic, commentary. When foreign men criticized their lack of traditional modesty, Spartan women replied with lines that still echo in ancient texts. Meanwhile, Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, stepped forward as Rome's designated savior and hero, which sounded impressive, except Pompey was no longer the unstoppable general he once was. By this point, Pompey was Rome's version of a retired, highly decorated celebrity attempting a financially dubious comeback tour. Pompey had seniority, prestige, and a resume full of successfully conquered continents. But he lacked one crucial thing: momentum. Caesar had just spent 10 years winning battles in Gaul. Pompey had spent the exact same 10 years winning Senate arguments and diligently avoiding paperwork. These were not equally transferable skills. Still, the Senate placed all its dwindling hopes on him. They handed Pompey command of Rome's armies and said, "Fix this disaster." Pompey, realizing he was not emotionally or militarily prepared to fight Caesar on short notice, did what any self-respecting military leader would do. He evacuated Rome immediately and told everyone it was part of his grand strategy. His plan was simple: retreat to Greece, gather reinforcements, and fight Caesar from a safe distance. Ideally, a very safe distance. Caesar didn't need to gather reinforcements. His soldiers were already with him, honed and ready to win wars before breakfast. So he marched across Italy like he was strolling through his own backyard, collecting supporters as easily as a medieval influencer collects likes. The ultimate showdown came at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Pompey had the numbers, the Senate's backing, and theoretically a better position. Caesar had peerless experience, tactical adaptability, and an army that had been winning so consistently they probably forgot how to lose. It wasn't a battle. It was a live demonstration of what happens when discipline fights crippling indecision. Pompey's forces instantly collapsed. Caesar won decisively. The lesson a hawker internalized early was brutal. Hesitation meant forfeiting both selling space and potential sales. In this environment, quick reflexes, swift feet, and powerful lungs were not advantages. They were indispensable tools for survival. A substantial number of these sellers were women, widows, single mothers, or wives seeking to bolster meager household incomes. They possessed an acute, practical intelligence, discerning instantly which customers were soft-hearted, which were hopelessly stingy, and which would haggle relentlessly until the point of sheer exhaustion. Other hawkers were children, too young for formalized apprenticeships but old enough to make a critical contribution to the family's existence. Still others were orphans, depending solely on persistence and sheer luck. In a dense city devoid of any formal welfare, successfully selling a meager basket of goods often constituted the line between having dinner and enduring another hungry night. Crucially, hawkers offered far more than just merchandise. They were the central nervous system for news. Gossip traveled through their ranks more rapidly than fever in a plague pit. They were privy to everything: the noble who gambled away his fortune, the merchant planning a secret wedding, the tavern keeper caught watering his ale, and which neighbor's daughter was meeting a certain assistant behind the local stables. If Tudor London harbored a secret, a hawker inevitably heard it first and broadcast it second. Overwhelmed markets like Cheapside and Smithfield transformed into open-air theaters where hawkers competed fiercely for attention. A truly skilled vendor could manipulate the crowd, drawing laughter, cheers, or gasps of astonishment. An unskilled or hesitant vendor, however, was instantly disregarded, utterly consumed by the city's overwhelming din. They were the conduits through which London drew breath. They were the voices through which London spoke. One famously told an Athenian woman bragging about her culture's modesty, "We are the only women who give birth to real men." These were not idle insults. They were profound expressions of deeply rooted national pride and purpose. Storytelling and poetry were also critical components of the curriculum. Girls memorized heroic tales, not as dreamy entertainment, but as vital moral lessons reinforcing courage, loyalty, and discipline, virtues reiterated in every verse. Songs and recitations honed rhythm, memory, and emotional control, all essential skills for public gatherings and civic rituals. Education further prepared girls for leadership roles within their families and communities. Spartan women could legally inherit property, manage land, and oversee helot labor. Their mental training ensured they were fully prepared for responsibilities that Greek men in other cities would never permit their wives to hold. The result was a generation of women who walked, spoke, and thought with unwavering self-assurance. Outsiders claimed Spartan girls were too bold, too confident, too free. But Sparta believed the precise opposite. A strong city required strong minds just as much as strong bodies. If there was any single part of Spartan life that truly scandalized the rest of Greece, it was this. Spartan girls did not train in secret. They competed in public. They ran races, wrestled, danced, and hurled javelins before crowds that included men, elders, visiting diplomats, and even foreign spies who carried tales back to Athens with wide eyes and shaking heads. To the conventional Greek world, women's athletic competitions were simply unthinkable. To Sparta, they were essential. Public festivals like the Heraea and the Gymnopedia transformed the city into a grand arena. Girls marched out confidently, hair loose or braided, clad in simple tunics that left their limbs entirely free for movement. Pompey fled, desperately seeking safety in Egypt, only to be greeted by a reception committee that grimly interpreted diplomacy as unrequested assassination. The Egyptians killed him, presented his severed head to Caesar, and awkwardly expected applause. Caesar did not clap. Pompey's death wasn't a simple victory. It was the definitive end of an era. The Senate's old guard lost their champion, their stability, and their last fragile illusion of control. With Pompey gone, Caesar stood alone at the top. No rivals, no counterweight, no brakes on the vehicle. He was driving straight into Roman history. The Republic hadn't entirely fallen yet, but it had definitely started wobbling violently. After Pompey's spectacularly unfortunate exit from world history, Julius Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed champion of, well, everything. And the Senate, realizing they now possessed all the negotiating power of a wet sponge, tried their best to adapt. Their new political strategy was simple. Pretend they were still in charge while giving Caesar every single title he asked for. At first, they made him dictator, which was acceptable. Rome permitted temporary dictators during genuine emergencies, but these emergencies kept mysteriously continuing, mostly because Caesar kept winning wars, fixing intractable problems, and reorganizing the state in ways that made the Senate feel utterly useless. So they made him dictator again and again. It became a morbid running joke. Asterisko, another crisis. Better give Caesar absolute power until it's sorted. Asterisk, the Senate was essentially auto-renewing his subscription to total authority. Then came the final, terrifying promotion. Dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. This was the political equivalent of slapping a, "Yes, I am basically king," sticker on Caesar's forehead, and instructing the entire Senate to be extremely cool about it. To Caesar, this new title made perfect administrative sense. And within their cries, shrill, persistent, and full of life, one could genuinely hear the true pulse of Tudor daily life. Yet, if the streets were loud, the taverns were louder still. These establishments functioned as the throbbing social centers of Tudor London, places where every social class, save for the highest nobility who feigned indifference, eventually converged. To step inside one of these smoky, low-ceilinged ale-houses, often supported by crooked, dark beams, was to grasp instantly why the city could never be accused of tediousness. The interior air was heavy and palpable, dense with the mingled smells of roasting meat, stale, spilled beer, burning tallow candles, and far too many people jammed into confined quarters. Ale was, quite literally, the lifeblood of the city. Since water sources were dangerously unreliable, frequently contaminated by sewage or industrial runoff, even children consumed weak, small ale with the same regularity modern people consume water. Taverns typically brewed their own liquid wares, resulting in unique flavors that stretched from surprisingly earthy to almost entirely repulsive. Despite the low quality, patrons argued heatedly over which venue offered the cleanest brew, though the actual threshold for cleanliness remained comically minimal. Inside, the noise level was tremendous. Conversations crashed over one another like auditory waves. Draymen loudly lamented the burdensome taxes. Sailors exaggerated tales of ferocious storms they had survived. Housewives engaged in intense comparisons of fish and wool prices. Actors from nearby playhouses declaimed dramatic lines, hoping their performance might win them a complimentary drink. Apprentices, strictly forbidden by their guild masters from wasting wages on such idleness, inevitably snuck in, desperately trying to avoid recognition. These revealing garments shocked outsiders who viewed modesty as the supreme feminine virtue. Spartans, however, valued freedom of movement far more than modesty. A garment that restricted an athlete was considered an insult to her and to the city. The competitions were fiercely intense. In foot races, girls sprinted with long, powerful strides, kicking up dust as the crowd roared its approval. Wrestling matches were often even more dramatic. A well-executed throw could ignite cheers, while a clever escape earned respect from even the sternest Spartan elders. Javelin contests tested accuracy and technical skill, rather than mere brute force, and girls celebrated each other's victories with a camaraderie that reflected their shared, rigorous training. These events, however, were not just athletic showcases. They served deeper social and political purposes. First, they publicly reinforced the core ideal that every Spartan girl, regardless of wealth or family status, was expected to embody strength. The competitions functioned as tangible proof of their physical excellence. Second, they prepared the girls psychologically for adulthood. Performing before an audience built confidence, courage, and essential composure under pressure. Third, the festivals acted as controlled meeting grounds for young men and women. Spartans believed that strong offspring came from strong parents who admired one another's excellence. Athletic competitions allowed potential partners to view each other at their peak. Swift, fierce, determined, and utterly unashamed. Love in Sparta began not with poetry, but with public performance. Foreign visitors were stunned by the sheer authority and freedom Spartan girls displayed. Athenians whispered that Spartan women were immodest or lacked control. But beneath the criticism lay the recognition that these girls moved with a confidence rarely seen anywhere else in Greece. He genuinely needed uninterrupted authority to rebuild a republic that was collapsing faster than a badly constructed Roman roof. He wanted stability, efficiency, and the ability to make critical decisions without asking permission from 50 men who couldn't even agree on lunch. To everyone else, this title was a flashing neon sign reading, "Monarchy incoming." Romans hated kings, *Rex*, with a white-hot passion normally reserved only for tax collectors and people who cut in line. Their entire national identity was fundamentally built on not having a king. You could threaten Romans with famine, war, or plague, and they'd hold steady, but whisper the word Rex, king, and they'd sprint into the streets, screaming hysterically. So when Caesar sat on a golden chair, started wearing special robes, got his own month in the calendar, and had statues of himself placed strategically next to the gods, let's just say public perceptions were not great. Some senators saw raw ambition turning into dominance. Others saw dominance turning rapidly into tyranny. All of them watched their personal influence evaporate like cheap wine spilled in the summer heat. The Senate began imagining a future where Caesar ruled indefinitely. Their power shrank to purely decorative status. And the Republic became a dusty museum exhibit labeled, "Look what we used to have." The idea of Caesar as dictator for life didn't just frighten them. It absolutely convinced them that if they didn't act soon, they would become irrelevant relics of a political system Caesar was already happily reinventing. And nothing terrifies a politician more than irrelevance. If there was one single word that could send Romans into a full psychological meltdown, it was king, Rex. Romans feared kings the way modern people fear unexpected phone calls, with immediate suspicion and an overwhelming urge to flee. The entire Roman Republic was built upon the proud, sacred memory of kicking out their last king centuries earlier. And deep within the dimmest corners, clandestine deals were hammered out, some legitimate, some overtly criminal, and many falling into a gray, questionable middle ground. Gambling was ubiquitous. Dice rattled ceaselessly against worn wooden tables. Cards were dramatically slapped down with feigned confidence. Men could squander weeks of wages in minutes, win them back in hours, only to lose everything again before morning broke. Arguments frequently escalated into sudden violence. The sight of a flung tankard or a hastily drawn dagger was disturbingly routine. To ensure order, tavern keepers maintained heavy, thick staffs behind the bar, wielded not as decoration but as a daily requirement. Music formed another persistent layer of the soundscape. A traveling lute player might exchange a mournful ballad for a plate of stew. Drunken parties of patrons would belt out traditional songs so raucously that window panes visibly rattled. Even the supposedly more refined establishments near the Strand hired musicians, who typically struggled in vain to project over the general uproar. Yet, ale houses transcended mere entertainment. They functioned as informal job exchanges, lawless courtrooms, unstoppable rumor mills, marriage negotiation sites, political debating stages, and crucial emotional refuges. Here, a person could mourn a loss, celebrate a triumph, vent their fury, confess a secret, or simply achieve oblivion, all within the span of one evening. Furthermore, women's participation was greater than historical records generally acknowledge. Many taverns were owned by shrewd widows, and female brewers ranked among the most highly respected tradespeople in London. In these boisterous rooms, London revealed its true self. Honest, deafening, unfiltered, fiercely ambitious, and eternally thirsty. The competitions created a public culture of strength, a constant reminder that Spartan women were not hidden figures behind closed doors. They were visible, formidable, and utterly essential to the identity of the state. By the time a Spartan girl reached adulthood, her training had molded her into a figure the rest of Greece scarcely recognized. A woman unafraid to meet any gaze, unashamed of her body, confident in her strength, and fully aware of her profound civic responsibilities. Marriage in Sparta did not mark the beginning of her duties. It marked the continuation of everything she had trained for since childhood. While other Greek brides were sheltered, veiled, and instructed to be obedient, Spartan women entered marriage like athletes entering a new arena. Spartan marriages were unusual from the very beginning. Courtship was not a matter of quiet glances or poetic exchanges. Young men admired women for their athleticism, their sharp wit, and their boldness. Strength was attractive. Intelligence was admired. Confidence was expected. Some sources even describe mock abductions, symbolic rituals that emphasized the transition into adulthood, but these were far removed from the timid ceremonies of Athens. Once married, a Spartan woman assumed a role absolutely central to the city's survival, producing strong children. This expectation was neither hidden nor softened. It was spoken openly, repeatedly, and often bluntly. A Spartan mother was celebrated when she bore healthy sons who would become warriors, but she was equally respected for raising resilient daughters who would continue the same tradition. The pressure was intense, but so was the honor. Spartans believed that the fate of the entire state rested partly in the hands and bodies of its women. Childbirth was viewed almost as a warrior's final trial. They didn't merely dislike monarchy. They treated it like a hereditary curse on the national soul. So when Julius Caesar began acting just a little too regal, senators started sweating profusely through their togas like they were trapped in a sauna staffed entirely by their political enemies. To be fair, Caesar didn't wake up one morning and declare, "I am your king now. Deal with it." He wasn't an idiot. But he did accumulate honors with such relentless enthusiasm that Rome began to look less like a republic and more like a soft-launch monarchy. It began subtly. A special chair here, a fancy purple robe there, a statue placed among the gods, a month named after him. Classic, humble behavior. The Senate kept handing him honors because telling Caesar no was increasingly hazardous to one's career longevity. And Caesar, being Caesar, accepted everything. Why not? If people want to hand you the symbols of divine authority, declining them feels almost rude. But to everyday Romans, these honors were raising red flags the size of naval sails. Then came the infamous Lupercalia incident. During a lively public festival full of athletic running, joyous shouting, and ritual weirdness, Mark Antony dramatically tried to place a royal crown on Caesar's head. The crowd reacted instantly, not with cheers or celebration, but with the ancient Roman equivalent of absolutely not. Caesar theatrically refused the crown twice, as if auditioning for the role of reluctant monarch who totally isn't enjoying the suspense. But the damage was done. The people didn't trust Antony's performance, and the Senate definitely didn't trust Caesar's refusal. Everyone saw it for what it truly was: a calculated test balloon to see how Rome felt about crowns. Spoiler: Rome hated crowns. Rumors exploded across the city. Caesar wanted to be king. Caesar planned to make Rome a monarchy. Caesar would soon rule like the old tyrants. It didn't matter whether the rumors were factually true. While the hawkers infused the streets with continuous noise and the taverns saturated them with untold stories, the craftsmen of Tudor London provided the city with its vital sense of purpose. Every narrow alley, enclosed courtyard, and bustling market lane reverberated with the rhythmic clatter of specialized tools, the steady beat of skilled hands actively shaping the mechanics of daily urban life. Carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths, weavers, glovers, and dozens of specialized trades constituted the powerful backbone of London's economy, each meticulously protected and rigorously regulated by formidable guilds. A craftsman's day commenced exceptionally early, often long before the church bells chimed the hour. Apprentices set about sweeping floors heavily layered with sawdust, soot, or leather scraps. Masters meticulously inspected the tools that had been sharpened the prior evening. Journeymen, dedicated to eventually earning the esteemed title of master, prepared their raw materials under the constant supervision of their superiors. Guild mandates controlled every minute aspect of the business: the required duration of an apprenticeship, the only acceptable designs, the fixed prices that could be charged, and the specific locations where goods could be sold. To violate these stringent regulations resulted in heavy fines, the confiscation of all inventory, or, in the most severe instances, total expulsion from the trade. Approach a blacksmith's forge, and the resonant ring of the hammer would reach you long before you caught sight of the glowing iron. Sparks erupted like momentary fireflies with every strike, briefly illuminating the smith's face, dark with soot. Carpenters labored in exposed sheds, expertly shaping the timber beams for the ramshackle houses that often tilted precariously over the thoroughfares. Weavers sat perpetually hunched over their looms, the mechanical movement of the shuttle acting like the sustained heartbeat of London's textile industry. A woman who had run long distances, wrestled opponents, thrown javelins, and trained her body rigorously from infancy was expected to endure labor with exceptional courage and endurance. The pain was not minimized. It was embraced as proof of strength. Stories circulated of women rebuking those who cried out too loudly, urging them to remember their training. But motherhood in Sparta did not confine women within the household. Spartan women maintained unusual legal and economic freedoms. They could inherit significant property, manage large estates, and oversee helot labor while their husbands served in the army full-time. Their rigorous education prepared them thoroughly for this independence. Foreigners often accused them of possessing too much power. But to Spartans, such authority was practical and absolutely necessary. A Spartan mother did not cradle her child with softness alone. She actively instilled fearlessness, discipline, and absolute loyalty to the state. Her lullabies were not gentle fantasies. They were promises that her children would grow into the exact strength she had been trained to embody. By adulthood, the training of Spartan women had produced a figure so distinct, so radically unconventional, that the rest of Greece simply didn't know what to make of her. To Athenians, she was loud, unfeminine, and shockingly free. To Corinthians, she was dangerously persuasive. To poets, she was an anomaly. Neither the soft, domestic figure they usually praised, nor the withdrawn maiden they expected to see behind closed doors. But to Sparta, she was the indispensable backbone of the state. The constant presence of strong women shaped Spartan culture in ways that outsiders found both admirable and deeply unsettling. A Spartan woman could stand before the elders and speak boldly. She could rebuke a coward, praise a hero, and command the respect of battle-hardened soldiers. Political fear works faster and more effectively than political truth. Senators already deeply worried about Caesar's growing power now saw him as a man drifting dangerously close to the one taboo Rome simply could not tolerate. The Republic survived corruption, multiple civil wars, riots, and endless incompetence. But a king? That was the final, unforgivable straw. To them, Caesar wasn't just becoming powerful. He was becoming un-Roman, and that, in their minds, was a crime worthy of steel. If Rome had an unofficial motto during Caesar's spectacular rise, it was, "We love powerful men until they actually become powerful." The Senate was full of aristocrats who adored prestige but universally despised competition. Their egos were huge, their actual accomplishments modest, and their tolerance for anyone seriously outperforming them was approximately zero. Enter Julius Caesar, a man who made every senator look like they had been running Rome on comfortable autopilot for the past 50 years. The Senate didn't just fear losing political control. They feared losing relevance. And in a world where public honor was the primary currency of existence, irrelevance was a fate significantly worse than bankruptcy. Caesar's massive victories made the Senate's minor achievements look like glorified internship credits. Worse still, Caesar began doing the unthinkable. He bypassed the Senate entirely when solving systemic problems. When senators stalled, Caesar acted. When they bickered, Caesar delivered. When they wrote long, detailed speeches criticizing him, Caesar wrote short, concise laws that replaced them. He made the machinery of government move again, which was fantastic for Rome, but deeply inconvenient for men who preferred the machinery rusted, jammed, and perpetually under their exclusive control. This is precisely where the Senate's collective ego kicked in hard. Some senators genuinely believed Caesar threatened the Republic's soul. In a cooper's workshop, the air was heavy with the rich scent of newly planed oak and burning pitch as he assembled barrels. These specialized craft streets constituted distinct neighborhoods. Shoe Lane housed the cobblers, Pudding Lane the bakers, Ironmonger Lane the metalware sellers. Milk Street, Bread Street, and Fish Street Hill were all named with absolute, practical literalism. London reserved its imagination for other matters. These sectors throbbed with unceasing activity. A complex, localized choreography of labor performed by thousands who seldom ventured beyond the geographic boundaries of their particular trade. Yet, the guild system represented more than just rigid bureaucracy. It fostered a powerful sense of community. Members routinely supported each other through phases of illness, funeral arrangements, the initiation of apprentices, and formal celebrations. Feast days prompted grand displays, complete with ornate banners, public parades, and an astonishing quantity of food sufficient to rival a lavish noble banquet. Masters invested deep personal pride in their output, signing or stamping their distinguishing marks onto their goods with the same reverence an artist afforded a finished painting. For all its prescriptive strictness and inherent noise, the world of the Tudor craftsman showcased a fundamental truth. London sustained itself not merely through finance and rumor, but through the continuous, tireless work of untold hands in workshops that almost never quieted. Here, skill was both identity and primary currency. If the organized craftsmen supplied London's structure, the itinerant street performers provided its vibrant soul. To walk through Cheapside or across London Bridge on a typical morning was to participate in a sprawling, open-air theater, one that required no admission ticket, adhered to no fixed script, and succeeded or failed based entirely on the fleeting temper of the audience. Her training had taught her that her voice mattered, that her judgment held weight, and that courage was not a masculine trait, but a Spartan one. Foreign ambassadors often commented that Spartan women ruled their men. Spartans simply laughed at this notion. Women did not rule. They enforced standards. A coward returning from battle could not hide behind excuses. Mothers were famously known to greet survivors with cutting words. Return with your shield or on it. It was not cruelty. It was a cultural duty. A Spartan woman upheld the exacting expectations she herself lived by: endurance, loyalty, strength, and honor. Even in everyday life, their presence profoundly shaped the city. They controlled large amounts of property and thus influenced the economy. They raised children with fierce independence and discipline, and because they were educated, they could debate, advise, and challenge civic ideas. Their athletic training afforded them health and longevity, making them visible in public life far more than women elsewhere in Greece. To outsiders, this visibility was nearly scandalous. They accused Spartan women of arrogance, immodesty, and excessive power. Yet beneath the criticism lay a current of envy. Other Greek cities recognized that Sparta's strength rested not only on its fearsome warriors, but on the resilient women who produced and raised them. Strong mothers created strong sons and even stronger daughters. The legacy of Spartan women endured long after the city's military might faded. Historians recorded their powerful sayings, their confidence, their physical prowess, and their vital roles in shaping one of the most disciplined societies the ancient world had ever witnessed. Their training was not merely athletic, it was cultural, psychological, and profoundly political. In the end, what truly terrified Greece was not that Spartan women were strong. It was that Sparta believed women's strength was absolutely essential. Others were simply upset that they weren't getting invited to the really good banquets anymore. Many feared that Caesar's surging popularity with the masses meant their political opinions were fast becoming optional, like the fine print on a loan contract. Even worse, Caesar forgave his enemies. This highly visible act of mercy, meant to unify Rome, only terrified them further. A forgiven enemy is not a safe enemy. It's a man who knows you owe him your life, and who can casually take it back whenever he chooses. The Senate felt like a large group of nervous cats being kindly petted by a man who happened to be holding a knife, just in case. That's when the conspiracy began to form. A loose, desperate alliance of senators with three common traits: bruised egos, declining influence, and a dangerously strong belief that everything would be immediately fine if they simply removed Caesar from the equation. This belief required an amount of optimism so powerful it truly deserved its own shrine. They convinced themselves they were heroes, liberators, and noble guardians of the Republic. In reality, they were overconfident aristocrats, terrified by the fact that Rome's most capable leader wasn't, in fact, them. The Senate told themselves they were saving Rome from tyranny. But deep down, many were saving Rome from something far scarier to their pride: a future in which Caesar succeeded entirely without them. Every great political disaster needs a highly motivated project manager. And for Caesar's assassination, that complex role fell to Gaius Cassius Longinus, a man fueled by stern principle, soaring ambition, and an impressive, personal amount of deep-seated resentment. If Caesar was the sun, Cassius was the guy standing perpetually in the shade, muttering, "It's too bright, and I absolutely hate it." Cassius was not a casual fan of Caesar, not a casual critic, nor a passive-aggressive colleague. Jugglers, minstrels, agile acrobats, ballad singers, enigmatic fortune-tellers, and fire-eaters momentarily transformed mundane lanes into unpredictable stages, their livelihoods dependent entirely upon the sound of applause. A lute player might position himself on a street corner, singing a tragic ballad about an ill-fated lover or recounting the final words of an executed criminal, narratives Londoners consumed as voraciously as daily gossip. Children were always the first to congregate, completely mesmerized. Adults soon joined them, often pretending they had merely paused to rest their weary feet. A highly skilled singer might collect enough coins to secure a good meal for the day. A poor singer, conversely, earned swift ridicule, which, in London, often sounded far louder than any applause. Jugglers tossed dangerous knives in confined alleys, occasionally missing their targets by mere inches, necessitated by the fact that their performance area simultaneously served as a walkway for impatient butchers and racing apprentices. Acrobats tumbled and flipped in open squares, churning up dust and eliciting robust cheers. Some performers sported cheap, gaudy costumes aped from professional playhouses. Others simply performed in the patched clothing they owned. Yet, every single one of them grasped a core truth. On the tumultuous streets of London, entertainment was directly synonymous with survival. However, the performers shared the streets with an unsavory element. Rogues, cunning tricksters, and expert pickpockets viewed the packed crowds as their natural hunting territory. A nimble cutpurse could deftly relieve 3 men of their wallets during the peak moment of an impressive juggling routine. They operated in sophisticated teams. One individual manufactured a compelling distraction, another executed the theft, and a third instantly melted back into the flow of bodies. Illyrian nobility built its power upon something older than iron weapons, older even than their fortified hilltop settlements. Lineage. A noble family's authority did not stem from elections, legislative decrees, or written law. It came from blood, an ancestry stretching back to legendary founders, storied warrior kings, and ferocious sea raiders whose exploits were retold beside hearthfires for generations. To be born into an Illyrian aristocratic clan was to inherit a defining story, a sacred duty, and an irrefutable claim to rule. Every noble family guarded that claim with a fierce, almost ritualistic pride. Their rugged homeland, marked by steep mountains, dense forests, and a jagged coastline facing the Adriatic Sea, shaped them as much as their ancestry did. Power flowed not from cities, for the Illyrians built few of those, but from hill forts known as gradina. Massive stone strongholds perched high enough to maintain watch over fertile valleys, crucial trade routes, and the territories of rival tribes. Within these formidable walls, noble families lived in extended households, surrounded by loyal warriors, skilled craftsmen, seers, and servants who constantly reinforced their status. Trade further enriched them. The Adriatic Sea transformed Illyrian nobles into essential intermediaries between the wealthy Greek colonies to the south and the continental interior to the north. Ships laden with amber from the distant Baltic, tin and iron from the Alps, and high-value pottery, wine, and luxury goods from Corinth and Athens moved through Illyrian-controlled routes. The powerful clans who controlled the strategic ports and mountain passes controlled the wealth, and wealth in Illyria translated directly into political influence. Marriage alliances cemented political power. A union between two aristocratic houses was not a romantic event. It was a binding contract woven through diplomacy, strategy, and inheritance negotiations. He detested Caesar with the focused intensity of a man who had been outshone one too many times at staff meetings. Some of this hatred stemmed from ideology. Cassius sincerely claimed he was defending the Republic. Some came from injured pride. Caesar's rise made Cassius look like a mere supporting character, but a surprising amount came from professional jealousy. Cassius genuinely believed he was the better general, the better politician, and probably the better dinner guest. Unfortunately for him, history disagreed loudly and consistently. Still, Cassius possessed something dangerous: sharp intelligence. He wasn't the strongest senator nor the most popular, but he had the one talent every successful conspiracy needs: the ability to recruit people who will actually commit to the dangerous parts. Cassius could walk into a room of anxious, insecure nobles and walk out with 3 new volunteers and a rough timeline for regime change. He began quietly assembling a coalition of senators who shared 2 non-negotiable things: deep fear of Caesar and extremely high self-esteem. This was easier than you'd think. Caesar's blinding popularity had created a very long list of men who felt perpetually overshadowed. Cassius tapped into that insecurity like a professional motivational speaker, except instead of inspiring them to follow their dreams, he inspired them to participate in politically motivated homicide. But Cassius knew something crucial. The conspiracy urgently needed legitimacy. It needed a face the public respected. It needed Brutus. Marcus Junius Brutus was descended from the man who famously overthrew Rome's last king. His family name screamed, "Protector of the Republic," the way modern brand names scream, "Influencer sponsorship." If Brutus joined the cause, the conspiracy would instantly transform from a grumpy aristocrat stabbing club into a noble, necessary crusade. London's sparse authorities attempted to suppress this activity, but the chaotic streets offered perfect cover, complete anonymity, and escape routes too convoluted to police effectively. Elsewhere, fortune tellers, some genuinely perceptive, others outright charlatans, established makeshift booths draped with cloth. They read palms, interpreted bone casts, whispered cryptic prophecies, and sold simple charms guaranteed to repel sickness, ward off heartbreak, or prevent bad fortune at sea. Respectable housewives sought their counsel. Young men might openly scoff at them, only to return covertly later for advice before an important gamble. Even conservative merchants often paid for divined omens before undertaking major business dealings. In a city where pestilence and fire were omnipresent threats, the line separating practical superstition and firm belief was remarkably fluid. Finally, the storytellers commanded attention. Perched atop overturned barrels or shipping crates, they would recite epic heroic sagas, thrilling foreign adventures, or the latest scandalous rumors. In a metropolitan area characterized by widespread illiteracy, these orators functioned as the populace's newspapers, historians, comedians, and moralizing preachers simultaneously. Working together, performers and rogues transformed London's streets into a high-stakes, unpredictable stage where every corner promised either a captivating show or a calculated scam. If there was a single location where the entirety of Tudor London converged, the wealthy, the destitute, the honest, and the crooked, it was the markets. Great hubs like Smithfield, Cheapside, Leadenhall, and Billingsgate, along with dozens of minor squares, collectively served as the city's vast, open stomach. Daughters were prized for the powerful alliances they could forge, while sons were trained from childhood to defend the clan's honor with spear and shield. Feasts, religious rituals, and negotiations all revolved around ensuring that the sacred bloodline remained unbroken and unchallenged. Foreign observers, particularly the Greeks, often described Illyrian nobles as simultaneously fierce and extravagant. They looked like hardened warriors but dressed with the splendor of kings. They commanded remote mountain tribes yet engaged in sophisticated trade with distant cultures. Their authority, though unwritten, was absolute. The common people obeyed because the nobles embodied the essential identity of the clan itself. In this world, lineage was not merely a record of names. It was a living force carried in treasured jewelry, echoed in solemn burial rites, and loudly proclaimed in every public gathering. An Illyrian noble family ruled because its ancestors had conquered, traded, negotiated, and survived. Their blood was their throne. To understand Illyrian nobility, one must climb. Their power was not seated in open plains or coastal capitals, but on rugged heights where massive stone walls crowned the mountaintops. These fortified settlements, the Gradina, served as both ancestral homes and undeniable symbols of dominance. From their vantage points, aristocratic families watched over everything. Trade routes winding through the valleys below, herds moving across hillside pastures, and rival clans daring to trespass on contested borders. A Gradina was not a palace in the polished Greek sense. It was a fortress, a resolute statement of endurance against the elements, warfare, and the relentless march of time. Massive dry stone walls encircled the upper terrace, built with such precision that many sections still stand centuries later. Inside were clusters of rectangular houses, vast storage pits, smithing workshops, and dedicated ceremonial spaces. So Cassius courted Brutus relentlessly, complimenting his virtue, praising his wisdom, and subtly suggesting that Caesar might be drifting a little too far into kingly comfort. Cassius was essentially the world's first political influencer, slyly sliding into Brutus's DMs with messages like, "Hey, want to help save Rome?" Cassius didn't invent the conspiracy. He organized it. He branded it. He gave it deadly purpose. Without Cassius, Caesar might have lived longer. With Cassius, the Senate had a plan, reckless, dramatic, and doomed in the long run, but a plan nonetheless. If Cassius was the calculating brain of the conspiracy, then Marcus Junius Brutus was the moral window dressing, the decorative fig leaf meant to desperately hide the fact that the assassination was mostly driven by ego, fear, and severe professional jealousy. Brutus didn't join the plot because he was inherently ruthless. He joined because everyone kept telling him in highly flattering terms that he absolutely should. Brutus was intelligent, deeply philosophical, and profoundly idealistic. A man who quoted Plato while other senators were still arguing about optimal seating arrangements. His reputation for virtue was so strong that people genuinely assumed he woke up each morning glowing faintly with civic righteousness. If Rome held a poll for most likely to die for the Republic, Brutus would have won in a landslide. Cassius knew all this and exploited it like a masterful marketing executive. He needed Brutus not because Brutus was a brilliant strategist, he wasn't, but because Brutus's presence made everything look respectable. If Brutus said, "Yes, let's stab the dictator," then surely it must be the noble, right thing to do. And poor Brutus, he actually believed that. He wrestled with the decision endlessly. On one hand, Caesar had shown him affection, friendship, and strong political support. Here, the perpetual struggle of every London household unfolded in plain sight, enveloped by a potent blend of odors. Raw meat, newly baked bread, damp wool, exotic spices, human sweat, hay, and the occasional fragrance of a misbehaving goat. Markets were not simply busy. They were sustained sensory storms that never seemed to dissipate. Butchers wielded their cleavers, hacking through carcasses with enough violent force to startle nearby children. Bakers aggressively bellowed the day's prices even before their fresh loaves cooled. Poulterers brandished live chickens as though they were making rhetorical points. Women selling eggs sharply hissed cautions at any buyer who reached too carelessly. And, constant throughout this melee, were the ubiquitous bells, church bells, handbells, warning bells, the unending metallic pulse of the metropolitan center. Successful navigation of this environment demanded careful strategy. Shrewd housewives maintained detailed mental maps, knowing precisely which stalls arrived first, which ones employed illegal rigged weights, which vendors deliberately diluted their milk, which ones combined aging meat with fresh cuts, and which were reliable for fair prices and honest portions. Bargaining was never merely an option. It was a necessary ritual. The seller would commence by naming an outrageously high figure. The buyer would respond with a dramatic scoff, and this theatrical performance would proceed until both parties reluctantly capitulated to a final number neither preferred, but both begrudgingly accepted. The olfactory assault was ceaseless. The fishmonger sections advertised their location blocks in advance. The butcher stalls reeked of warm blood and damp sawdust. The cheese vendors provided both strangely heavenly and utterly repulsive aromas. Spice merchants, however, created small, momentary pockets of paradise. At the highest point, always the highest, stood the residence of the noble clan, larger, sturdier, and positioned so that every visitor immediately understood exactly who ruled this mountain. Life inside these hill forts revolved around the aristocratic household. Warriors trained tirelessly in the courtyards, their polished shields catching the morning light. Craftsmen produced weapons, intricate jewelry, and prestige objects destined for noble use or diplomatic exchange. Herdsmen arrived from the lower valleys bringing tribute in livestock. Priests or seers performed essential rituals near sacred stones or altars, calling upon ancestors or mountain gods to protect the settlement. On the other, Brutus was descended from Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who helped expel Rome's last tyrant. In Roman politics, family legacy was practically a second spine, and Brutus carried his like an unbearable burden. Everywhere he went, people whispered, "Your ancestors saved the Republic. So, what are you doing about this whole Caesar thing?" Cassius leaned into this pressure with the subtlety of a battering ram. He told Brutus Rome was truly on the edge of monarchy. He hinted that Caesar viewed him as a son. And then he posed the most dangerous rhetorical question in history. Asterisk, what would your ancestor think of your silence right now? Asterisk, that did it. Brutus finally convinced himself that killing Caesar wasn't personal. It was purely patriotic. He framed it as a philosophical duty, a moral obligation, a necessary civic sacrifice. It sounded incredibly noble, until you remembered that Caesar trusted him, loved him, and never saw the betrayal coming. Nobility is often a messy business. When Brutus finally joined, the conspiracy transformed overnight. Senators who had hesitated suddenly committed. Others who weren't sure if stabbing their leader was appropriate suddenly decided, if Brutus thinks it's. Having executed their bloody act, the conspirators anticipated a chorus of public acclaim. They had romanticized their exit, picturing themselves as heroic liberators processing from the Senate, heralded by cheering citizens, perhaps even receiving spontaneous, complimentary triumphs. Their conviction was absolute. They had purged Rome of tyranny. Fate, however, rarely honors delusion. The moment they spilled into the streets, proclaiming liberty, freedom, as though their dramatic entrance was the city's long-awaited cue, they were greeted not with cheers, but with paralyzed confusion and awkward silence. The powerful, expensive scents of cinnamon, pepper, nutmeg, saffron, and cloves, often costing more than some earned in a week, drew shoppers who paused simply to inhale something pleasant for a change. Roaming animals contributed liberally to the bedlam. Stray dogs furtively begged for discarded scraps. Pigs frequently escaped their pens, squealing victoriously as desperate boys pursued them. Horses created sudden mud puddles that splashed nearby skirts. Market days represented an eternal collision of human and animal life, with every entity fiercely vying for attention, space, and a sliver of survival. Yet, the markets extended far beyond simple commerce. They were vital information hubs. News propagated here more rapidly than anywhere else in the city. A rumor quietly started at one end of Cheapside could be common knowledge at the far end within minutes. Merchants were acutely aware of who was currently courting whom, which foreign ships had docked, the likelihood of new rumored taxes, and which noble had publicly shamed himself at the previous night's banquet. For the average London resident, the market was not just a place to acquire provisions. It was the absolute nucleus of civic existence. Without it, the city would be utterly starved, not only physically but socially and politically as well. When darkness finally draped its curtain over Tudor London, the city did not lapse into silence. Instead, its character simply transformed. The insistent shouts of the hawkers subsided. The metallic hammering of the craftsmen ceased, and the clanging market bells grew quiet, replaced by a wholly different auditory landscape. Now one heard the creak of tavern doors, loud laughter spilling out into the narrow alleys, the distant slosh of the Thames River, and the purposeful steps of individuals who chose to conduct their business after sundown. London after dusk was a distinct world, governed by its own set of rules, rhythms, and ever-present dangers. The Adriatic was not just a body of water to them. It was a highway of opportunity, a glittering corridor that connected their rugged homeland to the wealthy worlds of Greece, Italy, and the distant north. Controlling the coastline meant controlling the vital flow of goods, and Illyrian aristocrats mastered this with a sharpness that deeply impressed even their rivals. Noble clans oversaw harbors tucked between rocky inlets where sleek wooden ships, some Illyrian, some foreign, loaded and unloaded cargo under watchful eyes. They negotiated directly with Greek merchants who sailed from Corinth, Apollonia, or Syracuse. Men who quickly learned that Illyrian chieftains were shrewd, calculating traders. These were not simple barbarians, as some Greek writers dismissively claimed. They understood value, leverage, and the commercial power of scarcity. Amber, washed down ancient trade routes from the Baltic, passed through Illyrian hands on its final journey to wealthy Greek buyers. So did precious metals from inland mines, fine livestock, salt, timber, and slaves captured in raids or purchased from neighboring tribes. In return, the nobles acquired wine, olive oil, fine textiles, bronze vessels, painted pottery, and decorative armor. Goods that significantly elevated their prestige and transformed their households into sophisticated displays of cosmopolitan wealth. At their coastal strongholds, the aristocracy acted as indispensable gatekeepers. Nothing entered or left without their explicit approval, and every exchange fundamentally strengthened their political authority. A noble family that controlled a key harbor became indispensable not only to their own tribe but to foreign powers seeking stable trade routes. Greek colonies relied heavily on Illyrian cooperation. Etruscan traders courted their favor. Even early Roman envoys understood the importance of maintaining good relations with these coastal rulers. But trade was not always peaceful. The atmosphere was less revolutionary celebration and more a failed social gathering, where the hosts discover their guests arrived without enthusiasm or refreshments. The common populace held little affection for the senatorial class. They remembered Caesar, the man who provided debt relief, reliable food supplies, games, and genuine stability. Tangible results rather than the long speeches and tax hikes typical of the senators. When the self-proclaimed saviors declared Rome redeemed, the reaction was the ancient equivalent of a bewildered shrug. Asterisk, we didn't ask for this. Asterisk, panic quickly replaced celebration. Shops shuttered, doors slammed, and citizens retreated indoors. Rome was not welcoming a republic. It was anticipating a civil war, the inevitable consequence of eliminating powerful leaders. The conspirators faced a critical realization. They had a severe political marketing failure. They had entirely neglected a succession plan. Their strategy amounted to Step 1. Eliminate Caesar. Step 2. Magically restore the Republic. That second step required far more diligence. This fundamental oversight was brutally exposed at the funeral, an event that extinguished their remaining political viability. Mark Antony, a veteran of emotional warfare and dramatic theater, delivered a eulogy of such devastating power it redefined the political landscape. Displaying Caesar's blood-drenched toga to the masses, pointing at each betrayal mark, Antony skillfully leveraged grief and rage, implying not outright accusation, but profound, sorrowful disappointment. The populace's grief instantly morphed into raging vengeance. Mobs hunted the conspirators, burning homes and draping Caesar's statues with accolades. Justice now meant retribution. The self-styled liberators found themselves scrambling into hiding, bewildered by the rapid disintegration of their flawless scheme. As daylight vanished, so too did any comforting illusion of safety. The narrow, uneven, crooked streets, faintly illuminated by weak, smoky lanterns, instantly became hunting grounds for thieves, belligerent drunkards, expert cut-purses, the sometimes shady night watchmen, and anyone desperate to remain anonymous. Apprentices staggered home from alehouses, singing boisterously until their liquid courage abruptly failed in the face of a shadowy alley. Women returning from late washing or fetching water defensively clutched their baskets. Even wealthy, seasoned merchants noticeably quickened their pace, understanding that no amount of riches could shield them from a well-concealed highwayman. The official night watchmen patrolled in pairs, equipped with lanterns and imposing long staffs, constantly shouting obligatory warnings as they passed. Keep your fires low. No wandering. No fighting. Their operational authority, however, was highly inconsistent. Some watchmen were genuinely courageous, others were hopelessly lazy, and a few were, ironically, more inclined to petty theft than to civic protection. Nevertheless, anyone caught loitering after curfew ran the risk of being thrown into the public cages or issued a substantial fine for disorderly conduct. Amidst the gloom, the taverns emitted a warm, inviting glow, casting golden light, and occasionally stumbling drunken bodies onto the pavement. Inside, arguments invariably escalated as the effects of ale lowered inhibitions. Dice clattered violently, songs swelled, fights flared. Tavern keepers, hardened by the constant chaos, dealt with unruly patrons by simply dragging them out and abandoning them on the cold cobblestones. Some men remained where they landed, loudly snoring their way through the frigid night air. Simultaneously, London's most destitute settled into sheltered doorways, beneath stairwells, or against the thick walls of churches. Pirates roamed the Adriatic, some operating independently, others functioning under the quiet protection or silent approval of Illyrian nobles. A powerful clan might shelter pirate crews in exchange for a significant share of the profits, strengthening their own economy while simultaneously undermining rival ports. The Greeks complained bitterly about this reality, but they continued to come to trade. The wealth was simply worth the risk. Through the Adriatic, Illyrian aristocrats transformed themselves from isolated mountain warlords into elites possessing genuine international influence. Their ships carried more than goods. They carried status, strategic connections, and opportunities. A noble family's power, once rooted strictly in blood and stone, now extended across the sea's shifting blue horizon. If one wished to recognize an Illyrian noble at a glance, one did not look for crowns or royal robes. Instead, one looked for the undeniable gleam of precious materials that spoke a silent but unmistakable language of status. Prestige in Illyria was displayed not through architectural grandeur, as it was in Greece, but through personal adornment, elaborate jewelry crafted from gold, amber, glass, and bronze, and imported luxury items that signaled the clan's vast wealth and far-reaching connections. Gold was the aristocracy's favored medium. Smiths shaped it into heavy spiral bracelets, substantial neck torques, delicate earrings, and intricate fibulae that fastened cloaks with an air of both elegance and absolute authority. Some pieces were astonishingly detailed, featuring stylized animal motifs, deer, rams, serpents, that echoed the spiritual and mythic world of the Illyrians. Wearing such items was never simply an act of vanity. It was a political declaration. Gold loudly announced bloodline, ancestral heritage, and current political power. Amber, however, carried a different and deeper meaning. Their act hadn't restored liberty. It had detonated the Republic's fragile equilibrium, igniting the fuse of a devastating civil war. Claiming to save Rome, they had merely guaranteed its final collapse. The structural integrity of their restoration plan proved to be weaker than a rain-soaked papyrus scroll. With Caesar gone and Rome seething, the political vacuum created was vast enough to consume the entire political establishment. They had anticipated a swift return to a mythical golden age. Instead, the state reacted precisely like a system that had just watched its most effective administrator butchered by incompetent plotters. Into this maelstrom of confusion stepped a quiet, intensely calculating 19-year-old, Gaius Octavius, Caesar's adopted son and primary heir. The conspirators initially dismissed him as a harmless, physically frail adolescent, a polite inconvenience with no real power. This monumental misjudgment would seal their fate. Octavian possessed all of Caesar's acute political acumen but none of his predecessors' famed clemency. While the assassins squabbled over procedural matters, Octavian silently consolidated power, securing Caesar's armies and forging crucial alliances. He was joined by Mark Antony, Caesar's fiercely loyal general, who sought both vengeance and personal domination, preferably while indulging in the finest Mediterranean wine. Soon, Antony and Octavian recognized that their mutual animosity toward the conspirators surpassed their distrust of one another. They forged the Second Triumvirate, a formal, state-sanctioned pact dedicated solely to political revenge. Their immediate goal was the complete eradication of their enemies. Brutus and Cassius mustered their forces in the east for one final ideological confrontation, only to be utterly annihilated at the Battle of Philippi. The defeat was so conclusive that both leaders chose suicide over the humiliation of capture. The dream of the Republic perished with them. Since fires were strictly prohibited after a specific hour, warmth was secured only through close physical proximity or through sheer force of endurance. Rats scampered freely, emboldened by the lack of pedestrian traffic. Prowling cats efficiently hunted, performing their essential civic duty, whether acknowledged or not. And yet, despite all the underlying tension and fear, moments of beauty persisted. The moonlight shimmered delicately off the Thames River. Small candles flickered in high-up windows. Faint laughter drifted across the rooftops. Lovers exchanged quiet whispers beneath dark archways. The vast city inhaled and exhaled differently now, more slowly, but never truly sleeping. Tudor London, in all its grit, peril, opportunity, and explosive energy, operated on a relentless 24-hour cycle, and its streets, regardless of the hour, perpetually held a new story to share. A Spartan daughter entered a world defined by stark necessity, finding no welcoming softness awaiting her arrival. Across the rest of Greece, newborn girls were tightly swaddled, kept strictly indoors, and subtly indoctrinated that their proper domain was sheltered, silent, and unseen. In Sparta, however, the precise instant a girl drew her first breath, the state formally claimed her. She was not merely property of her family but a deliberate, living investment in Sparta's sustained military and political power. Her own mother, hardened by these identical expectations, offered no gentle lullabies or promises of a pampered youth. Instead, she accepted the deep-seated truth known by every Spartan woman: only the robust were fit to survive here. A daughter was expected to develop into a mother whose physique could endure the trauma of childbirth, whose spirit was capable of weathering profound loss, and whose courage rivaled any man preparing for battle. Strength, fundamentally, was not a choice. It was an unavoidable civic duty from infancy. Sourced from distant northern lands and transported through long, dangerous trade routes, amber was rarer and shrouded in mystery. Illyrian nobles prized it not only for its warm beauty but for its symbolic connection to far-off realms. Many believed it held protective or magical properties. Necklaces of polished amber beads often accompanied noble women, while warriors sometimes carried amber talismans into battle or burial. The presence of amber in a household unequivocally signaled a clan's deep participation in long-distance trade networks, and therefore its regional importance. Glass beads imported from Greek or Phoenician workshops added brilliant color to noble attire. Their vivid blues, greens, and reds caught the sunlight, highlighting the nobles' access to foreign artistry and luxury. Sunlight during ceremonies and feasts, drawing the eye and immediately marking the elite from the common classes. Bronze mirrors and intricately decorated pins completed this impressive ensemble, transforming the human body itself into a dynamic display of wealth, diplomatic reach, and cultural identity. These objects were never worn casually. They made their required appearance during rituals, grand feasts, high-stakes negotiations, and formal processions, crucial moments when a noble family needed to project indisputable authority. Even their adversaries recognized the potency of such lavish displays. A richly adorned Irian noble signaled a clan capable of commanding significant warriors, controlling vast wealth, and securing powerful alliances. Archaeologists today frequently discover these prestige items preserved in graves, where they continue to narrate stories of status long after their owners have been returned to the earth. Each bracelet, bead, and brooch reflects both the sophistication of Irian craftsmanship and the aristocracy's deep-seated desire to preserve its identity through material objects as enduring as stone. Rome was rid of its liberators, leaving only its inheritors. Predictably, with the threat neutralized, Antony and Octavian turned their considerable forces upon each other, for Rome seemed fundamentally incapable of sustaining true peace. This final conflict culminated in yet another civil war, which Octavian won decisively. Following the dramatic fall of Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian returned to Rome as the unchallenged master of the Mediterranean. In 27 B.C.E., he adopted the name Augustus, thereby becoming the first Roman emperor. The Republic was dead. The empire was realized. All because a cabal of ambitious senators believed 23 knife wounds could neatly solve a century of political dysfunction. Spoiler, it failed. The first breath drawn in Tudor London is never a welcome. It is a violent collision. The air assaults you like a tangible wall, thick, alive, and utterly inescapable. It is a dense, pungent broth of brewing ale, heavy tallow smoke, wet horse manure, the brine of frying eels, communal human sweat, fetid river mud, and the previous night's discarded waste from chamber pots. Locals were long since anesthetized to this bouquet, but visitors recoiled, choking, crossing themselves, or instinctively seeking refuge. This signature scent was the unavoidable toll of the kingdom's loudest, fastest-growing, and most vital city. Slowly, the sun creeps over the crooked timber houses, their upper stories slouching inward, resembling a cohort of gossiping matriarchs. A milkmaid navigates cautiously around pools of questionable liquid. A baker, already glistening with sweat, wrenches open his shutters, yelling down the lane at an urchin pursuing a terrified chicken. Meanwhile, a householder across the way empties her night bucket directly into the gutter, offering a perfunctory warning cry, a formality, as everyone understands the necessity of keeping one's head perpetually ducked. Yet, beneath the grime, the city throbs with irrepressible energy. Her entire upbringing rigorously reflected this singular duty. Spartan nurses, whose formidable toughness was known throughout Greece, molded these infants using methods outsiders frequently deemed brutal. Babies were immersed in cold water to physically harden their constitutions. They were fed extremely simple foods, specifically intended to condition their stomachs for future scarcity. They were deliberately left to cry, not from lack of affection, but to rapidly instill essential resilience. If a child showed signs of being sickly or frail, the whispers that started were not ones of pity, but intense speculation regarding whether she could ever prove useful to the state. In sharp contrast to Athenian girls, who were closeted indoors and instructed in rigid modesty from the moment they could speak, Spartan daughters were given the liberty to move freely outdoors, exposed to the sun and the raw earth. Their developing bodies were not sequestered behind drapery or stone walls. They were encouraged to stretch, climb, and achieve physical sturdiness. Even in these earliest years, they were attuned more to the harsh rhythms of nature than to the delicate domesticity expected across the rest of the Greek world. During this foundational phase of life, the Spartan ideal took hold. A girl absorbed the unconscious understanding that weakness was a disgrace, that fear was learned rather than inborn, and that her intrinsic purpose transcended any personal ambition. The city viewed her as the future breeder of warriors, the future guardian of Spartan values, and the future speaker of the famously fierce rhetoric Spartan women utilized. From the moment she achieved mobility, she was constantly exposed to models of the woman she was destined to become. Poised, fiercely athletic, openly opinionated, and unconditionally devoted to Sparta. Her childhood would not grow easier from this point. In fact, it was slated to become significantly more demanding. Through gold and amber, Irian nobles did not merely decorate themselves. They unequivocally proclaimed their status. Yet, for all their wealth, Irian nobles never allowed anyone to forget that their lineage was fundamentally rooted in warfare. Prestige was not solely manifested in imported finery and jewelry. It intensely radiated from the weapons and armor they bore, especially the ceremonial helmets that quickly became some of the most iconic symbols of Irian elite culture. These helmets, often masterfully crafted from bronze with a distinctive elongated shape, were far more than military equipment. They functioned as powerful declarations of authority, priceless heirlooms passed down through clans, and clear markers of a noble's inherent right to lead. Some featured ornate crests, repoussé decoration, or powerful stylized animal motifs. Others displayed meticulously polished surfaces designed to brilliantly catch the sun on parade days, reflecting light like a deliberate beacon of power. A noble adorned with such a helmet was not just a warrior, but the living representative of his ancestors. Each strike of the hammer during crafting echoing generations of battles fought across the mountains and valleys of Uria. These sacred helmets were rarely, if ever, worn in casual combat. They were reserved for significant ceremonies, feasts, critical diplomatic gatherings, and funerary rites. When worn by living nobles, they symbolized a perpetual readiness for war. When placed on the heads of the deceased, they served as undeniable reminders of status, lineage, and valor. Burial sites frequently contain helmets that had been intentionally bent or ritually killed to accompany their owner into the afterlife, ensuring that their prestige could not be usurped by any other living person. The street hawkers are the first orchestra members, crying out their goods with rapid, practiced cadences. Hot pies, fresh pies, oysters, 6 for a penny, old clothes, bring out your old rags. Their overlapping shouts generate a unique, chaotic symphony that soundtracks the London dawn. Carts groan and rumble across the uneven cobblestones, pulled by beasts seemingly as worn down as their drivers. Apprentices dart through the narrow passages, delivering parcels, bread, or cloth, weaving skillfully around stray dogs, sleeping drunkards, and unpredictable swine. The alleys are a noisy, frantic race, as if the entire populace is competing to achieve the highest decibel level. Early smoke blends thickly with river fog, casting a gentle, obscuring blur over the landscape, a soft focus that momentarily hides the city's rougher contours. Once the light sharpens, the unvarnished reality returns. Peeling timber, ubiquitous mud, patched roofs, and signs clattering restlessly in the wind. It is a city devoid of gentle beauty, unlike the tranquil countryside, but it possesses an electrifying, relentless vitality. This initial inhalation of Tudor London air reveals the essential truth. Survival and vast opportunity are inseparable partners here. The stench may be overwhelming, the lanes constricted, and the din bone-jarring, but the city is fully roused. And ready or not, it insists you awaken completely alongside it. Following the potent aroma, a guide even for the sightless, one inevitably arrives at the dominion of the fishmongers. Their market stalls congregate fiercely near the Thames and along the arteries leading to Billingsgate, where the river tide delivers both commercial promise and messy disruption. In this precinct, the fish trade dictates the entire environment, the volume, the workload, the general temperament, and the day's progression. As soon as a Spartan girl was capable of standing unsupported, she was obligated to run. This was not a dainty movement, not a shy exertion, nor a casual pastime, but a core foundational skill interwoven with her very identity. In a society fixated on physical perfection, running went beyond mere exercise. It was a powerful bodily declaration. It affirmed that her physique would develop to be swift, powerful, and highly disciplined, wholly capable of nurturing and enduring the next generation of soldiers without failing. Training was frequently conducted in the expansive, open fields outside the city walls, where the soil was unyielding and the sun relentlessly harsh. Girls ran barefoot, intentionally registering every sharp stone and root underfoot. Spartan trainers insisted this practice strengthened the tendons, hardened the soles of the feet, and enhanced immediate awareness. A girl rapidly grasped that to falter was to lose ground, and falling behind incurred public, merciless chastisement. Spartan culture offered no soft treatment to its male children, and it certainly provided none to its daughters. These exercises were not brief sprints. They were lengthy, grueling distances deliberately designed to forge supreme physical endurance. Instructors drove the girls to maintain synchronization, sometimes even demanding they match the pace of boys their age. The rest of the Greek world found this practice scandalous. The notion of young women visibly sweating, racing publicly, and competing openly was diametrically opposed to every accepted standard of female decorum. But Sparta remained entirely unmoved. It demanded powerful bodies, not fragile reputations. Furthermore, running instilled critical coordination and rigid discipline. Girls were taught precisely how to regulate their breathing, conserve necessary energy on ascents, and shift their body weight fluidly when encountering obstacles. Alongside the helmets rested shields decorated with geometric patterns, bronze greaves, and spears with leaf-shaped blades, objects that seamlessly blended practical craftsmanship with profound symbolic meaning. The noble class viewed a martial identity as absolutely inseparable from political authority. A successful leader had to be a warrior first, and perhaps a diplomat second. To rule without the proven ability to defend one's clan and territory would have been unthinkable. These ceremonial arms also served a critical psychological purpose. They projected immediate intimidation. Greek envoys meticulously recorded their encounters with Irian chiefs, who received them while wearing full warrior regalia, standing tall beneath helmets that glinted like fire. Whether or not a battle was imminent did not matter. The message delivered was always the same. This is a house of warriors, and its power is inherited, not negotiated. For the Irian elite, military symbols were not merely accessories. They were the very foundation of legitimacy. Even in times of settled peace, a noble's identity remained defined by the weapons he bore, the armor he displayed, and the ancestral tradition that demanded courage from every succeeding generation. If jewelry and weapons displayed Irian noble status visually, feasts and rituals displayed it socially. Prestige was not merely something worn. It was meticulously performed. Nowhere was this more evident than in the great communal gatherings held within the massive hill forts, where aristocratic families showcased their material wealth, reinforced vital alliances, and enacted traditions older than recorded history itself. A noble feast was never simply a meal. It was, rather, an overwhelming demonstration of abundance and inherent power. Long wooden tables groaned audibly beneath the weight of roasted game. Immense wheels of cheese, smoked fish, honey cakes, herbs, and large amphorae of imported wine. Long before sunrise, the stalls are already overflowing with baskets of serpentine eels, slick haddock, shimmering salmon, and mounds of shellfish that appear to regard the buyer with vacant suspicion. The fishmongers themselves constitute a distinct, hardened class. Their skin is perpetually imbued with the scent of seawater and offal, their heavy aprons rigid with dried scales, and their voices pitched aggressively enough to overpower distant church chimes. They hawk their prices with hostility, ridicule their competition without remorse, and engage in haggling battles as if the smallest coin held existential importance. Yet, beneath their rough demeanor lies formidable expertise. These merchants can clean a fish with lightning speed, discern the day's freshest haul by mere touch, and accurately calculate a customer's spending limit before the customer even speaks. Apprentices serve as frantic, scurrying shadows, bearing baskets so weighty they threaten to buckle young spines. A single error, a dropped sturgeon, a container of cracked oysters, results in immediate cursing, striking, or sharp public disgrace. Nevertheless, many endure and ascend, for fish represents one of London's most reliable currencies. Taverns depend upon it. Inns require it. Even the poorest families manage to spare a few pennies for salted herring, the ubiquitous, unofficial staple of the laboring community. The ground surrounding the stalls is perpetually slick. Fish scales adhere stubbornly to boots. Innards are swept directly into open trenches. Gulls hover above, like feathered thieves awaiting their chance to snatch the smallest unguarded morsel. Patient cats weave through the stacked barrels, earning their meals from the hands of weary workers or heedless children. The racket is continuous. Sloshing wash water, the sharp clinking of knives, traders' roaring arguments, and consumers driving hard bargains. But this is more than mere commerce. It is compelling street theater. The training refined them into efficient, formidable movers, attributes openly admired by Spartan men and often grudgingly envied by foreign visitors. Some itinerant Greeks remarked that Spartan girls ran with the self-assured demeanor of seasoned hunters, not demure maidens. They were correct. Beyond the immediate physical gains, running cultivated a more profound quality, mental endurance. A Spartan girl was taught never to yield simply because her legs were aching or her lungs were burning raw. She learned to actively push past pain, internalizing discomfort as a fleeting inconvenience rather than an insurmountable obstruction. This resilient mindset would necessarily accompany her into adulthood, sustain her through the demands of childbirth, and underpin the severe daily pressures of Spartan life. By the onset of adolescence, running had become as instinctive as natural breathing. Her stride was powerful and lengthy, her posture erect, and her awareness acutely tuned. She was capable of easily outpacing many boys her own age and virtually every woman from neighboring Greek city-states. And as she raced across the sun-baked plains or along river edges, she embodied a silent, critical truth well understood by the polis. A strong woman fundamentally created a strong city. If running forged endurance, wrestling built pure dominance. And this activity was perhaps the single greatest source of scandal for the rest of Greece. Spartan girls wrestled publicly, aggressively, and without the slightest sign of hesitation. To other polis, particularly Athens, this notion was utterly scandalous. Women were expected to be demure, mild, and largely invisible. Yet in Sparta, girls grabbed, grappled, pinned, and slammed their opponents to the ground with a practiced skill that often startled even mature male onlookers. Their rigorous training occurred in the palestra, the identical wrestling grounds utilized by the boys. Arians were skilled hunters, and nobles took enormous pride in presenting wild boar, stag, or bear. Animals whose capture symbolized their clan's mastery over the surrounding natural world. Guests understood that every single dish sent an explicit message. This clan controls the requisite land, labor, and prosperity. Music and sophisticated storytelling invariably accompanied the feast. Lyres, flutes, and percussion instruments created rhythmic soundscapes, while bards recited epic tales of heroic ancestors or legendary battles. These performances were not mere entertainment. They were essential tools of institutional memory, constantly reinforcing the legitimacy of a clan's lineage. A noble family's oral history was ceaselessly spoken aloud, so that its claims could never be forgotten or successfully challenged. Ritual drinking was another essential component. Distinctive drinking vessels made from bronze, gleaming silver, or elaborately carved horn circulated throughout the hall. To drink from a noble's cup symbolized acceptance, loyalty, or critical diplomatic recognition. Foreign guests were always honored by being offered the finest vessels, often decorated with spirals, animal figures, or geometric Aryan motifs. Ceremony blended seamlessly with pragmatic politics. Alliances were negotiated under the guise of hospitality. Marriages were discussed between bites of roasted meat. Boasts, challenges, and solemn oaths were exchanged before many witnesses. Prestige became a high-stakes performance, and every attendee understood the gravity of the stakes involved. Rituals accompanying these feasts added deep layers of spiritual meaning. Priests invoked the ancestors or the mountain gods, offering libations and calling for divine protection over the clan. Young warriors might be presented with their first weapons, symbolizing their formal passage into adulthood. Spectators wander here simply to absorb the frenzy. Housewives seeking neighborhood gossip loiter long after their purchases are made. Foreign visitors examine the stalls as if observing an esoteric rite. Even gentry, sometimes concealed beneath discreet cloaks, come to witness the raw, visceral drama of London's fish trade. By mid-morning, the freshest hauls are dispersed, the remnants salted or cured for future sale. The fishmongers grant their voices a temporary reprieve. Apprentices aggressively scour the cobblestones, and the river breeze returns, bringing with it the potent scent of the next incoming tide, and the implicit guarantee that tomorrow's struggle will restart well before the sun rises. Even when London basks under a warm sun, a perpetual shadow stalks the narrow thoroughfares, the memory and persistent menace of the plague. It is an enemy that never truly vanishes. Sometimes dormant, it inevitably returns with devastating intensity. When whispers of the sickness begin to circulate, a strange cough from next door, the sudden collapse of a child, citizens begin scanning the streets for a figure more dreaded than any thief or royal tax collector: the plague doctor. He manifests as a sinister harbinger, encased in heavy waxed leather, his features obscured by the iconic beaked mask. This frightening snout, packed with aromatic herbs, vinegar-saturated sponges, and hopeful superstition, transforms him into a figure straight from a recurring nightmare. Yet, in Tudor London, he is simultaneously feared and indispensable. Children retreat hastily behind closed doorways. Housewives make the sign of the cross. Shopkeepers rapidly board their windows, desperately attempting to bar death from their thresholds. The doctor proceeds with slow, measured steps, navigating lanes barely wide enough to accommodate his bulk. His wooden cane strikes the cobblestones, serving not only for balance, but also as a distant probe for examining the afflicted. There were almost no practical concessions made for gender differences. Under the searing sun, girls drilled tirelessly on holds, escapes, and effective throws, their bodies quickly becoming coated in the powdery sand. Their hair was tied back purely for functional efficiency, not for aesthetic reasons. Spartan instructors educated them on the critical importance of weight distribution, how to strategically unbalance an opponent, and how to employ momentum superior to reliance on brute strength. Wrestling was far from chaotic brawling. It was a highly disciplined tactical art form. The objective extended beyond mere sport. Sparta pragmatically held that a physically powerful woman would navigate childbirth with greater ease, thereby guaranteeing healthier offspring. More profoundly, wrestling cultivated mental toughness. A girl swiftly learned how to confront intense physical pressure without descending into panic, how to endure a hard fall without fear, and how to instantly rise the moment her body hit the earth. Spartan society deeply valued individuals who rebounded instantaneously from any setback, and this training established that characteristic early. Noble women played crucial and visible roles, too, offering libations, blessing new alliances, and managing the intricate household logistics that made such massive gatherings possible. Foreign observers frequently remarked on the sheer intensity of Irian feasts. What struck them most was not just the extravagance, but the raw energy, an atmosphere thick with pride, underlying rivalry, and the palpable presence of ancestors. These gatherings served as the social and political engine of aristocratic life, binding families to one another through shared ritual and shared spectacle. Among the Irian elite, power wasn't quiet. It was sung, toasted, displayed, and eternally remembered. While warrior chieftains often dominate the historical narratives of Uria, noble women formed the indispensable backbone of aristocratic power. Their influence flowed quietly but decisively through every sphere of elite life. Inheritance, diplomacy, ritual, household management, and the meticulous preservation of lineage. Far from the secluded domestic roles expected in the Greek city-states, Irian noble women operated with remarkable public visibility and tangible authority. A noble woman's primary responsibility was the maintenance of lineage. Aristocratic identity ran through the family tree, and women safeguarded it through strategic marriage alliances, complex inheritance negotiations, and the critical raising of heirs. Their marriages were strategic events orchestrated to bind powerful clans together. Crucially, unlike in many contemporary ancient societies, archaeological evidence, lavish jewelry, rich grave goods, and high-status burials indicates that they retained significant personal wealth and autonomy within these unions. Inside the hill forts, noble women skillfully managed the entire elite household, overseeing food stores, laborers, artisans, and the production of textiles, which were central to both the Irian economy and diplomacy. Every sound he generates, footfalls, the rhythmic tap of the cane, the rustle of his thick robes, is a profound, chilling announcement. Death has arrived. He may be trailed by watchmen whose duty is to identify and seal infected homes, nailing heavy boards across doors and windows to imprison families within until fate renders its verdict. Inside these quarantined spaces, conditions are horrific. Straw mattresses are saturated with the stench of sickness, sweat, and terror. The air hangs motionless, suffocating, and fetid. Small windows offer no relief. Below the floors and in the pantries, rats scurry freely, carrying the invisible contagion via the fleas they harbor. Even families not yet touched by the fever tremble at the doctor's approach. A mere suggestion of illness means being locked into their own confinement. The moment the boards are secured, neighbors abandon the street entirely, treating the alley like a cursed zone. Despite the terror they instill, these plague doctors are tragically inadequate, not miracle workers. Their armory, leeches, crude poultices, and mixed herbs, represents little more than desperate, hopeful experimentation. Some carry elaborate pomanders of rosemary and lavender, clinging to the superstitious belief that sweet aromas can repel infection. Others rely on burning pitch or sulfur, hoping the smoke will purge the atmosphere. Their actual medical understanding is minimal, yet their sheer bravery is absolute. They willingly enter danger zones long before any other citizen dares. When the doctor finally departs a house, the resulting silence is suffocating. Sometimes, he leaves behind fragile hope, more often, profound grief, and the residents of Tudor London, hardened as they are by necessity, murmur silent prayers with every corner he turns, hoping the grim silhouette is heading toward any threshold but their own. If the fishmongers provide. Skilled weaving was not just a domestic craft. It was a prestige manufacturing industry. Finely woven garments were offered as essential diplomatic gifts, worn during major ceremonies, or buried with nobles as ultimate symbols of status. The women who produced these goods wielded an economic influence that outsiders rarely appreciated. Noble women also played indispensable roles in spiritual life. They participated actively in ancestral rites, prepared sacred offerings, and sometimes acted as important intermediaries between priests and clan members. Their voices carried distinct authority during rituals of fertility, burial, or oath-making, where invoking lineage was absolutely essential. To dishonor a noble woman in Uria was to directly insult her entire clan, both living and dead. Foreign traders often commented on the confidence and boldness of Irian women, how they negotiated, supervised, and appeared publicly alongside men during feasts or ceremonies. Their jewelry, frequently made from heavy gold and gleaming amber, announced their status just as clearly as weapons announced a man's. Some grave sites even contain weapons buried alongside noble women, suggesting direct roles in defense or, at minimum, symbolic participation in the warrior identity of their clans. Most importantly, noble women shaped the next generation of leaders. They raised sons to be formidable warriors and daughters to be astute political assets, diligently teaching them clan history, expectations, and alliances. The continuity of aristocratic power depended entirely on their wisdom. A clan with a strong matriarch was considered stable. One without her was dangerously vulnerable. To the Greeks, Irian noble women seemed bold, extravagant, and unusually free. To Irians, they were indispensable pillars of aristocratic society, keepers of wealth, guardians of tradition, and architects of continuity. If the oppressive atmosphere of London was defined by its stench and its fear personified by the plague doctors, then the ceaseless movement and sound of the street hawkers formed its true, energetic heartbeat. From the moment the sun crested the horizon until the final vestiges of twilight disappeared, these vendors filled the cobblestone streets with an unrelenting, chaotic chorus. These sellers functioned simultaneously as the city's necessary messengers, impromptu entertainers, primary marketers, and unavoidable irritants. They offered everything imaginable: fresh food, cheap trinkets, dubious remedies, essential services, and the freshest gossip, and they sold it loudly. Each hawker possessed a signature ear-catching cry. A pie seller roared, "Hot pies, hot beef pies," until his voice was raw and broken. Another, selling pins and needles, utilized a half-sung, half-chanted rhythm. A woman selling fragrant lavender sprigs moved slowly, offering a brief, calming respite to anyone overwhelmed by the city's notorious stench. Children selling matches or apples shrieked over one another, as if volume alone might somehow conjure coins from passing pockets. The net effect was a non-stop sonic tapestry, equal parts organized commerce and utter chaos. These hawkers had to navigate London's crowded alleys with the fluid swiftness of fish. Street space was not a thoroughfare. It was a contested battlefield. Carriages rattled past without slowing down. Butchers dumped bloodied water directly into the gutter. Housewives actively jostled for minimal room. Apprentices sprinted by carrying urgent deliveries. A street hawker learned early that hesitation guaranteed the loss of both physical space and potential sales. Swift feet and powerfully loud lungs were deemed essential survival tools. Many of these tireless hawkers were women, widows, single mothers, or wives, working to supplement their household income. If everyday life revealed Irian noble status through jewelry, armor, and ritual, their burials revealed something far deeper: the profound worldview of a people who believed prestige should follow a person into eternity. Aristocratic tombs were not mere resting places. They were final, dramatic declarations of power, identity, and spiritual continuity. Each burial mound, stone chamber, or richly furnished grave communicated the same powerful message. This was no ordinary life. Irian nobles were often interred in tumuli, large earthen mounds deliberately built to dominate the landscape. Some stood alone, while others formed clustered cemeteries marking the ancient holdings of powerful clans. These mounds were designed to be utterly conspicuous, visible from far-off valleys or from ships approaching the coast. Their very presence reinforced ancestral claims to territory. Inside the tomb, the extensive grave goods spoke louder than any inscription could. Weapons were common, even in the graves of women. Swords, spears, daggers, and beautifully decorated shields symbolized a family's warrior heritage. These critical items were often ritually killed, bent, or broken, so they could accompany the deceased into the afterlife without being utilized by the living. Armor, especially the distinctive Irian bronze helmets, appeared frequently, reminding any who excavated these tombs centuries later that noble identity was perpetually inseparable from martial prestige. Yet these burials were not defined by weapons alone. Jewelry made of brilliant gold, radiant amber, and imported coral adorned the dead, reflecting the vast wealth and international connections of the Irian elites. Amber beads gleamed like drops of ancient sunlight. Intricate fibulae fastened ceremonial cloaks. Bronze mirrors and decorated pins emphasized physical beauty and status, even in death. They expertly knew which customers were soft-hearted, which were hopelessly stingy, and which would bargain relentlessly until the heavens collapsed. Others were children, too young for formal apprenticeships yet old enough to contribute vital income to the family's survival. Some were orphans who relied entirely on sheer luck and tenacious persistence. In a city utterly devoid of any formal safety net, selling a basket of meager goods could represent the critical difference between consuming dinner and going to bed hungry. Yet, hawkers offered more than just products. They were the city's primary source of information. Gossip propagated through their ranks faster than the plague through a rat nest. They knew which noble had lost his fortune gambling, which merchant was preparing to wed, which tavern watered its ale, and which neighbor's daughter was secretly meeting a rector's assistant behind the stables. If London possessed a secret, a hawker heard it first and shouted it second. Crowded markets, such as Cheapside and Smithfield, transformed into volatile theaters where hawkers fiercely battled for the crowd's fleeting attention. A truly skilled seller could make a crowd laugh, cheer, or gasp on command. A clumsy or hesitant one was instantly ignored, swallowed whole by the city's ambient noise. Through their persistence, London breathed. Through their network, London talked. And in their cries, shrill, stubborn, and vibrantly alive, you could hear the true, daily pulse of Tudor life. If the streets merely shouted, the taverns absolutely roared. These establishments served as the vital, beating social hubs of Tudor London, where every social stratum, except perhaps the nobility, who pretended to ignore them, eventually congregated. Step inside one of these smoky, crooked-beamed alehouses, and you immediately understood why the city could never be accused of being dull. Ceramic vessels, some locally made, others imported from centers like Corinth, Athens, or Apulia, accompanied the deceased, filled with offerings for the journey beyond. Feasting equipment, including specialized drinking cups and carved wooden bowls, hinted at the vibrant social life the noble had enjoyed and was expected to continue in the afterlife. For Irians, prestige did not terminate with death. It dramatically transformed into enduring legacy. Ritual practices added further layers of meaning. Some tombs show clear evidence of animal sacrifices, libations, or fire rituals performed at the time of burial. These ceremonies involved the entire elite community, reinforcing social cohesion and honoring the powerful ancestors who watched over the hill fort. To outsiders, Irian burials appeared excessively lavish, but to the Irian nobles, they were utterly essential. A proper burial was the final expression of a life lived with honor, wealth, and profound lineage. It preserved identity not just for the living, but for generations yet to come. By the time Rome inevitably set its imperial sights on the Adriatic coast, the Irian aristocracy had already carved its legacy into the mountains, the sea, and the memory of every tribe that lived between the Dinara Alps and the Istrian Peninsula. Their rule was not built on marble structures or written law. It was built on lineage, metal, ritual, and the unshakable conviction that prestige had to be actively shown, fiercely defended, and successfully inherited. Even as their world dramatically changed, the cultural echoes of Irian noble life continued to shape the region long after their individual hill forts fell silent. Roman authors wrote about the Irians with a mixture of professional frustration, grudging admiration, and thinly veiled fear. The air was thick with the rich smell of roasted meat, stale, spilled beer, burning tallow, and too many bodies packed into a confined space. Ale was the undisputed lifeblood of the city. Since water was notoriously unreliable and often contaminated by effluent or industrial runoff, even children routinely consumed weak, brewed ale as casually as a modern person drinks water. Taverns brewed their own, each possessing a unique flavor profile, ranging from pleasantly earthy to nearly undrinkable. Patrons argued passionately over which establishment served the cleanest ale, although the bar for cleanliness was often laughably low. Inside, conversations overlapped like clashing waves. Carters vented about levies and taxes. Sailors boasted of perilous storms they had narrowly survived. Housewives exchanged prices for fish and wool. Actors from the nearby playhouses loudly recited lines in the hopeful pursuit of earning a few free drinks. Apprentices, forbidden by their guild masters to squander their wages on idleness, snuck in regardless, constantly fearing recognition. And in the darkest corners, deals were struck. Some honest, some frankly criminal, and some merely questionable. They described chieftains who negotiated like seasoned diplomats, warriors who fought with terrifying ferocity, and noble women whose elevated status entirely defied conventional Roman expectations. To the Romans, the Irian elites were not primitive barbarians. They were genuine rivals with their own sophisticated political networks and powerful maritime ambitions. Many Irian noble families resisted Roman expansion fiercely. Their hill forts became strongholds of stubborn defiance. Their warriors fought with the same determination their ancestors had displayed for centuries, and their coastal fleets contested Roman control of the Adriatic Sea. Even when Rome ultimately achieved victory, it did not erase Irian aristocratic culture. Instead, it subtly absorbed essential elements of it. Some Irian nobles pragmatically joined Roman ranks, becoming auxiliary commanders or governors of newly incorporated territories. Their sons served as skilled cavalry officers, their daughters married into high-status Romanized families, and their ancestral wealth transformed into lucrative landholdings under Roman law. The symbols of their core identity, the gold jewelry, the amber ornaments, the ceremonial helmets, continued to appear in local graves well into the Roman era, quietly resisting cultural erasure. What fascinated Roman writers most was the Irian aristocracy's striking dual identity. These nobles were both formidable warriors and astute traders, mountain lords and capable sea captains, guardians of ancient ancestral rites and active participants in Mediterranean commerce. They stood at the crossroads of cultures, blending robust local traditions with sophisticated Greek influence and, later, with the structures of Roman administration. Their adaptability was not weakness, it was a successful strategy for survival. Even today, archaeological discoveries reveal how profoundly their legacy shaped the region. Hill fort ruins still silently watch over valleys. Tumuli still rise like silent sentinels. Gold spirals and amber beads still shine as brightly as they did in the hands of noble women centuries ago. The Irian aristocracy may not have left behind written chronicles, but they left something far more enduring, material proof of a powerful culture where prestige, power, and identity were perpetually inseparable. Their legacy did not vanish. It became the deep cultural foundation upon which later kingdoms and cultures would eventually rise.